All right. So without further ado, I believe. Um, so hello. And even before we say hello, we would like to ask you one question. So when you open a meeting for a group of people, it is quite common to start the whole thing by saying, "Hi guys." And the question we would like to start with is a question to you, obviously, what we can use instead of saying hi guys, and please use the chat if you have any ideas for alternatives. Don't be shy, there are no right or wrong answers. We're just curious. We would like to make it as interactive as possible. Yeah, you might just say hi everyone, hi folks, hi everyone. Just hi, absolutely. So as you can see, there's plenty of alternatives to use. And yeah, we could just say hi folks, hi all. It comes very naturally the moment you start thinking about it and start becoming more and more aware of this. Of course, it's not that saying hey guys is a criminal offense and you're going to be going to jail for this, but it's worth keeping in mind that it's not exactly neutral and it's not including everyone. And we're going to use we're going to talk about quite a lot of similar examples here today. So I guess we could assume by the fact that you're here that you're interested in learning about this thing, learning about handling words and learning about what lies behind this word and how we can make them more inclusive. So officially, we can welcome you to, oh, there's this weird. We can welcome you to our meetup about inclusive language specifically in digital services. And today we're going to talk about how we make products speak for everyone, how we include everyone in communication. We're going to talk about our perspective as people working in a health tech company, people working in Docplanner. If you are based in Poland, you may know us as Lekarz. If you are based in Spain, in Brazil, in Latam, anywhere in Latin America, you may know us as Doctoralia. So yeah, we do healthcare solutions, healthcare tech solutions. My name is Kalina. My pronouns are she, her, and today with me are Martyna and Wojtek. You can see also the pronouns here in the slideshow. And we're going to talk a bit of pronouns just as a spoiler. As a sneak peek, we're going to also cover such topics as sex and gender, condescending language, neurodiversity and disability to some extent, and cognitive biases, and to not make it just a long monologue from our side. We're gonna use some flash exercises along the way. So be prepared to use the chat as we proceed. Please do ask questions on the chat. We can see the chat when we are presenting, and we hope to make it as interactive as possible. So we hope you're going to enjoy the following hour and 20 minutes, I believe, more than an hour. So let's see what we have for you. First of all, why are we doing this? It's quite simple. We want to contribute to ending exclusion and to welcome everyone to digital products such as the one we're working on. We want to make sure we make space for everyone through inclusive language. And when the subject of inclusive language is brought up, you may quite often find people saying, but hey, like, aren't we like taking something from someone, like when focusing on one group? And this is what we want to emphasize here today, that language is not the cake. We make sure everyone gets a piece. We're not taking anything from anyone. Our mission is to include everyone in the way we speak, in the way we design products. And you will be able to see different examples from the products we are designing as well, and other products that you can also use as reference. And we are talking about this from the perspective of content designers. You might know this position as UX writer. Sometimes these names are often used interchangeably. So our role at work, our role as designers, is to guide people through services, through products with words. And today we're going to talk about how we can make these words more inclusive. We're going to use some real challenges, and this probably might be already coming to your mind that no digital product, including ours, is ideal. It is a journey. We're talking about the product with many years of legacy. Different people have been writing content for this product. It's been happening for years across different markets. So there are, of course, things that we are not super proud about, but we know it's a journey. We're on our way to make it more inclusive. And to reach that goal, we focus on listening. We're listening how people want to be addressed, how people want to communicate, how people want to be described, what language they want to use. And with that in mind, we're going to discuss these topics today. And now to switch to more concrete things, the frameworks we are using, I will pass the mic to Martyna.
Yes, as Kalina said, listening and respect towards others and also ourselves is super important for us. So this mindset from the book of Thomas Anthony Harris is super helpful for us as we are treating ourselves and others with the same respect in this assertive way where we all matter and respect each other. That's how we are treating ourselves in the company, and also how are we treating our users, patients, doctors, and other people we are creating content for. It's really helpful for us to keep this mindset. And our main goal is, of course, to make sure everyone is included in the language that we use. And as Kalina said, it's not taken away from anyone. And there are different ways language may discriminate. And for example, it may be because of gender, origin, sexual orientation, age, ability, appearance, education, economic status. There are many different ways. And unfortunately, we won't have time to cover all those cases today, but we will focus on some of them. And we wanted to ask you, what are your main doubts or main challenges you have at work, or maybe on your daily life? With which kind of discriminatory language? If you could share with us on chat, it would be super interesting. And you don't have to do it now. We will be coming back to the chat to see your answers and see the experience that you share. But, oh, I see age. Oh. We will be talking about age today, and ability, and gender.
Also, if you want your chat to be visible to everyone in the call, make sure to switch to everyone. Otherwise, you only as presenting people will we see your chat.
Oh, good tip. We will cover all those topics as age, ability, and gender. Exactly. Knowing what we don't know is a great place to start. And Talia, you wrote that different languages have really different gender structures. We will also cover that in a moment. So it's good to know what we don't know. And continuing, we will start with sex and gender. Exactly. So one of the issues that you face. So coming from this simple division where sex is biology and gender is identity, it's getting much more complicated as we have numerous genders. And sometimes it may be hard to navigate in it all. But the first important thing is not ask about gender or sex if you don't have to do that. So first, ask yourself if you really need to ask about it in your product or in your daily life. Kalina? Exactly. So we had this challenge once, not only once, but this feature was actually called Health Challenge, and we was recommending visits with the specialists for different people. So we didn't want to say that, if you are a women visit gynecologists, because that's not the way. So we used the organs that given specialties are treating, and this way user can get to know which specialist they should visit. So we didn't know that the first way that was the most helpful to do that was talking and listening to our users. And our colleague Patrick at that time made a small research with transgender people, asking them what would be useful for them, how we should speak in a respectful way. So I also recommend this to you all. So ask the people you are talking to. This way you can know and also get to know their perspective. Exactly, as I just said, if you sometimes need to ask this information, because, for example, in some cases it's important because of the legal reasons, just tell to the users why you need this information, or in order to address you properly, or because it's necessary because of some legal reasons.
Right. So there are different ways to get your head around like addressing people. And of course, like when in real life, face to face, you can always ask the pronouns. What are your pronouns? And then use them. There are different ways to do that in the product, and also to address the right identity of the person, because not always the identity we see, for example, in the official documents, which is often the case in healthcare, because in healthcare, we first need to identify people by their ID numbers, by their ID names, just like the same case is in the bank, right? This is the main source. The ID is the main source of information about the person. However, when you create applications, this is your territory, and this is your, let's say, house, where you can also apply the rules that work between people. And you can also ask, like we have an example from a Polish bank, a new update done quite recently, and we translated it also for you on the slide so that you can see. On the left we have the original screenshot from the app itself, and on the right we have translated versions for those who don't speak Polish. So there are two fields. One of them is of the name and surname as in they exist in your ID document, because this is like maybe your, that's not ing, not the color. That's I don't know, we can say, right? That's Santander Bank in Poland. They had a new version of the app launched quite recently, and there's an interesting feature where they ask how to call you. How shall we call you? What's your identity that you assume that you kind of want us to speak to, so that we don't harm you with using the name and surname, which is no longer yours. So that's one of the things, and this is perfectly fine in the application, because then the person kind of says, somehow introduces themselves to you, and then you can adapt and call them, even though their documents and the information about their ID details is still in the app, and all the papers are perfectly fine. Yeah, so if we can go further, Kalina. So there are, like Talia said in the chat, there are languages which are really, really difficult in terms of kind of flexion, how the words are shaped. They are extremely gendered languages, like, for example, Polish is, where every single noun and also pronoun and other parts of speech get gendered endings. So we have here, like, yeah, the way, like, the pronouns are just the tip of the iceberg, because when you address customers, users in your application, you're addressing them directly. So the pronoun is probably less used than their name, or different language forms, grammatical forms that will kind of talk about them to them. So that's that question about pronoun is deeper than just those two words. Is it he, she, or something else? Because by asking that, we actually mean what are the language forms that we need to use to address you properly. And that's difficult in some languages. On that screenshot here, you can see an example from Poland with various pronoun variations and the consequences of that choices that are kind of specific language forms. And that's actually a very interesting way to do that, because if you will be developing a similar feature, or a feature that kind of asks that, you can already signal to those people, if this is technically doable in your application, that, hey, this already not only means that we will talk like Wojtek is a he, but we'll also use male forms of the nouns, for example, or other parts of speech when we address you, right? So that's a hard case. There are languages where some of those things that we will be describing, like Italian, are super tricky. So of course you need to kind of this is just a kind of a signal for you to keep exploring how that works in your language. So because in many languages throughout the years, the male default form kind of was the male form was the default, right? Whenever you used to talk about someone and that person was not there in the room, or you would write about them, you would use a male gender endings, forms, blah, blah, blah. But this, of course, results in the way people perceive themselves through your eyes. Is it for me? Is it for whom is it? Is it only for men? Am I welcome? If that's an invitation to a webinar, is that a webinar for whom, right? Or, and then there are various types of research that kind of prove that this language forms that you use to refer to people, they transform to their perception. So for example, like whenever there are conferences or call for papers for speakers, and they use male forms, sorry, I was kind of disturbed by the chat. So if the invitations to conferences kind of use male-oriented language, there will be less women submitting their proposal for papers, and also less people joining. And the same for job application, or even like we have here a quotation from quite a recent research 2 years ago, like women addressed as men, they will not perform to their best, which is actually a terrible thing, because that's not how they are. So gender-related stereotypes exist in many languages, and depending on how long have you been stepping on the earth, they were kind of with you more or less kind of since the very beginning, because we learned the language, I don't know, at school, in playing with others outside. So that language kind of transfers to our minds. It gets kind of automatized, and it affects the way we perceive the world, but also how we address other people and how we talk about them. There are some stereotypes like manly behavior, blonde jokes, female intuition that kind of somehow may get into, I don't know, marketing communication and stuff like that, because some time ago they were quite often used. They were never fine, but nobody criticized them. Now we know they are harmful, and we know the effects of that language. So it's really cool to try to understand what's the language I'm using and who am I addressing and how. yeah, so any ideas how to write gender neutral in any language or your specific language? You can try in chat.
Yes, please add your ideas, examples, and answering the former question. Absolutely, there is we have urologist services for women as well. So this is a very valid point. The point there was about prophylactics, about exams that are recommended that should be done every year to track your health. That's why for different body parts, the suggested one was urologist and gynecologist. So in this specific example, we use this division, but it's absolutely fair point that women also are patients when it comes to urologists. Yes, sure, Lauren. Come back to the previous slide. There you go. If you have any questions about the things we present, please add them in the chat. We'll try to answer either on the go or maybe after we're done with the slides. But we will answer all the questions as well as we can. Yeah, using plural forms using plural forms when it comes to writing gender neutral. This may work in some languages, and that's the tricky part. What may work super well in Polish doesn't always work that well in, let's say, Roman languages like Italian or Spanish. So we're gonna use some examples today. We're gonna talk about English, obviously, but we're gonna talk about how that works in Spanish, for example, and in Polish, because they're the two languages we use most often in our work. Yeah, and I would absolutely agree that it all comes down before taking this one step back and thinking what our words carry before we write or speak. Yeah. So absolutely agree with this. And yeah, and the picture was in fact the urinary tract. I had the same question when I first saw the icon. So it was a urinary tract. I can confirm. I had the same train of thought. But yeah, coming back to gender neutral language, as Wojtek mentioned, I think it's super important. The fact that we're asking about pronouns in inclusive communication is very much English centered. A lot of educational materials are based on English, and while pronouns in English do most of the job, it's more complicated in Polish, for example, as adjectives are often gendered, as verbs can be gendered as well if they are in the past tense. So that's more complex. But we have one pretty handy solution available in English, and this solution is the singular they, which obviously doesn't cover all cases, but it makes a lot of things simpler. Right? We can say someone left not his or her umbrella, but someone left their umbrella. And you can see it quite often in books when book authors are talking about, let's say it's a book about management, about learning to be a good manager. They can say, oh, a good manager, he or she has to be like this. And instead of saying he or she, which looks unnecessarily complex and it's not inclusive, they can just say like, a good manager, they should be like this and this. And singular they works very well in these cases. Of course, there is this thing that they can be both singular and plural. So we need to think more globally about the language, but it's a very, very handy solution to use. So the main takeaway is don't use he or she. It's unnecessarily complicated and binary as well. It's not inclusive at all. Just use they if you can. And now, time for a round of flash exercises. I'm going to ask you and wait for your answers in the chat. What you can say instead of husband or wife. And just a side note, an important side note, we're not banning the words husband and wife. They are useful. They describe the reality. But let's say we don't want to assume that someone is a husband or a wife. So I see some answers already. Yes, we can just say partner. We can say spouse. Spouse doesn't imply let's say the legal status as well. So we can say partner, spouse. Perfect. You're doing great. All right, another one. What can you say instead of salesman to make it more inclusive? Salesperson. Amazing. Yeah, someone working in sales. Absolutely. Like in Polish, I'm going to cover that sales representative. Fantastic. In Polish, I'm going to cover that in more detail in a bit. We can say a person who does something, so like a designing person, osoba projektująca, and that's also another way to handle it. Salesperson, perfect. Chairman, not really a chairperson, right? Yeah, I mean, we could try like this, but maybe there are other alternatives. This one's slightly more creative. A chair, like a person, you know, in this role of a chairman. Just chair, yeah. You can just say chair, or you can use a synonym. You can say head, coordinator, the boss, presiding officer. Exactly. All right, another one, mankind. Humankind, humanity. Great. Humanity, just human beings, or just let's make it more human, right? Like we're making helper more human, aren't we? That's our motto here at Docplanner. We can just say people. We can make it sound more human. All right. So that's about writing gender neutral in English. And English is pretty easy, but things can get more complex when it comes to localization. So when if you have some ideas about writing gender neutral in your language, if you're using other languages in day-to-day work, and you would like to share some tips, go ahead. The chat is all yours. And then you can move to the part that's not so easy to Google, which is localization.
Yes,
And
so we
over
would,
to Martyna. Yes.
thank you, Kalina. So we would like to share a couple of localization techniques that we use at Docplanner, as we are working in several languages, including Polish, Italian, Spanish, Portuguese, and other languages. So now we will just name a couple of those techniques and we will go to examples. And we are more than welcome to share your examples from your languages too. So the most basic way, maybe not basic, but general way to do that, to write gender neutral way, is just saying things in a different way. So instead, for example, of saying some often say, you can say you can often hear. So instead of we are just changing the way of saying things, or we can turn adjectives into nouns or adverbs. So try to be specific, describe all the details. Of course, in English, we don't even have this problem, but if it was in Polish, we would have the specific word would be gendered. So we have to walk around a bit to say it in a gender neutral way. Yes, we can also switch from past to present tense. Again, it's very useful in Polish because the past tense is always gendered. So instead of forgot password, don't remember password because it basically means the same thing. Or we can invert the point of view. And instead of saying that we've prepared the results, where we have to say it in the past tense, we can say about the results that they are waiting here for you. And there are more techniques, but the ones are most popular among us, I would say. And more about Polish. I've already told you that in the past tense is always gender, so we can switch to present tense. But sometimes we cannot do that. Then we can just change the subject. So we did something for you. We've prepared the results instead of you did something. Or as one person on chat previously wrote, we can say, use this form of person doing a thing. Or so designing person, or salesperson, or person working in sales instead of salesman or designer. All those words in Polish will be problematic and gendered. And in Spanish, our Spanish colleagues teach us those useful examples. For example, even welcoming people in Spanish may be gendered. So instead of bienvenidos or bienvenidas, which are gendered, we can say te damos la bienvenida. Or about the job titles, we can say ayudante instead of secretaria, or using articles tus instead of los. So those tips are super helpful. And yes, and please share your examples, because we know that, for example, Italian is also quite tricky. Yes. And usted,
Yeah,
usted in Spanish.
Some of
there
those
it's also
forms.
sorry,
Some of
we
those-
had this one. Sorry, we're overlapping. We had this one comment about designing person not being a great option, as this suggests the person is not a professional. And I think there is an interesting point. Would you agree, Martyna and Wojtek? Like using an adjective instead of something naming the profession.
So actually, I wanted to comment on that because I think once that phrase is still taken out of context, which, and we know in communication, context is quite important. And the second thing, so we can be more precise, designing person in English. Yes, of course, this sounds kind of out of context. You don't know perfectly what it's behind that. In Polish, probably because that's kind of related, this would already sound a little bit different. And then if you obviously make it more precise, what designing what, and then of course all the context around it should help. And maybe one more thing, because some of those kind of forms, language forms that we will start using or introducing to our products will sound new because we never heard them before. So there will be just a moment of kind of, what is this? Okay, and then it's either like, if it sounds funny to you, but then not funny to others, like maybe it's a moment to think like, why does this sound funny to me and not to the others? Or just a matter of kind of seeing more and things more and more will kind of make us get accustomed to that, and also others. So there's kind of a lot of nuances to how we use that new language, if it's new, right? Because some of those forms are not new, but the persistent use of person, for example, in Polish is kind of new. Not sure if you want to add anything about this.
I think we can continue later if you have some time left, and now we can continue with the slides, but it's an interesting topic, definitely.
So let's go to the next one. Yeah, super easy thingy, condescending language, because it's just enough. If you could keep adding, like, it's just enough to get rid of some words and you're done. Well, yes, of course, that was a joke, because like condescending language, what does it mean? It displays even if it's not consciously used, it still displays your superior nature towards others, right? And words are consciously or not consciously communicating that someone is kind of maybe worse, less equipped, or not smart enough and stuff like that. Sometimes that condescension can have like also a patronizing effect, like you would either imply that someone is inferior or you would imply that you are superior. So that happens when you, for example, oversimplify the language, which is, for example, addressed to an educated group of people, or you go too plain with your language when talking to experts, which is related to one of the myths that you cannot use plain language for experts. Of course you can, but you need to adjust the vocabulary for them. Because if you use too simple words, they will feel offended, and you're suggesting kind of, hey, maybe you're too simple to understand that professional language, right? Or just an implication that someone knows less than you. For example, by saying, you don't know how much experience we have, or for sure you haven't heard. Those tricks, you can hear that sometimes or read that in marketing. But I suppose, Kalina, you want to comment on the oversimplified communication?
Yeah, I just had an example. There's an example that came to my mind. Let's say otolaryngologist, a term that we would use to describe the doctor who's like an eye, nose, and throat doctor. And one of our competitors, I'm not going to use the name because that's not the point, they are using this exact expression, eye, nose, and throat doctor. So this is the doctor you're searching for when you use their product. And while this might be easy to understand for the patients, I believe otolaryngologists wouldn't want to be called eye, nose, and throat doctors when they register to be on the platform. And I think this would be a nice illustration of what the use of oversimplified condescending language towards experts could look like coming from our healthcare perspective. So maybe just to add an example to this.
Yeah, for sure. We can't address, hey, dear nose doctor, how's your practice going? We cannot address emails like that to experts, right? Yeah, they would unsubscribe faster than they subscribe, right? So condescending language is kind of very nuanced, and you have to be careful for the words or phrases or the meaning that you're implying, right? Are you also suggesting that someone has to do that? And then the last thing is kind of the thing that started with the trolling, like the language that suggests that something is easy, super easy, simple. Those words, we can cross them out from our product communication, because you don't know how easy or how difficult things are for different people. You're not kind of able to understand their situation, mental health, physical condition. So not everything that is simple for you or short is equally simple and short for others. If that happens, this misalignment, then that other person to whom you're writing, whom you are addressing, will feel inferior or even worse. And sometimes, if there are some UX designers here, we hear that in our user tests, like where people kind of turn into that mode. Oh, it's not me. I'm not qualified. I don't know. I usually make that mistakes. That's what happens. The application made them feel inferior or incompetent, whether they are not. So that's what language does to people, and we have to be very careful. And one of the ways is to know and understand who you talk to. And sometimes you need to talk to people in different ages. And then that's a question like, who is old, who is young? Does it even matter, right? Because there are different traps in language, even in seemingly neutral forms, but by the common use that people have. And this is unfortunately very country or culture specific, where those international, maybe not English, but your specific country language or culture language will be come into play. Some of the words to address younger, older people, even though they might seem neutral, because of the common use in phrases, sayings, and different contexts, they are kind of introducing bias to the communication. And first of all, like with gender, do you need to ask for age? Because this is one of the oldest and least effective categorizing or grouping your target audience by age. This is what does not work. And so some of the stereotypes exist, and they can get into the language, because you may suggest that old is good or the old is bad, or the other way around, right? Sometimes you can see the image, and this is also true for the images, right? You can say like, be the youngest senior, full of energy and independence. So as if like the young senior, like the person who is kind of not teenager anymore, they cannot be independent. Or are the young people only independent or full of energy? Well, that's a stereotype that you're kind of embedding into your language. Or, for example, generalizing about age groups, like children are people too, right? So this type of thing. Or showing younger and older as two different opposing or kind of not the same groups. For example, I don't know, help your parents to live in an active life like yours, right? So you're opposing parents and children, the one generation against the other. One is better, the other is maybe needs an upgrade. Or showing an images, for example, I don't know, older people shopping in the market, picking, I don't know, apples and potatoes, and young people playing video games or I don't know, at a party. Infantilizing, using kind of in terms like girls towards adults and stuff like that. This kind of doesn't work. And also one of the common stereotypes that can get into product communication is kind of mixing the roles with age. For example, not all pensioners are grandparents. Not all grandparents are retired people, and things like that. So this is something to look for. And if we can go further, so if you really have to talk about age, you can use numbers, because numbers are objective, right? People may not feel comfortable with them, but still they don't judge, right? So you can say like patient aged 40, or if you're over 70, you can do something, or there's an opportunity for you, and things like that. Or if you switch perspective, maybe, if you can go to the next slide, please. And instead of talking about age, you talk about a benefit, right? So stay refreshed since morning, instead of like feel young, right? Because the goal or the benefit of, I don't know, using something during your sleep, before your sleep, or after your sleep, is being refreshed. Or if you're advertising, tracking boots, right? So the most important thing is that you can walk using them on any surface. And it's like not the point of being like, you can jump like a teenager. No, you can, it's mud, water, rocks, whatever, snow, those boots are for you, right? So this is kind of totally different, still selling point, but totally unbiased. So that's the approach. And then maybe you can even add some twist, because of course, like first, if you're asking at the age, it would be good to say why you need that information. And sometimes this is required because, for example, there are some age limits for some services. I don't know, banking, e-commerce, they have age limits. But if it turns out that person is too young or not the right age to use not the service, you can say, like in this example, we're sorry, we cannot offer the service today, but come back on your 13th birthday, because that service is available for 15, 13 and older. So instead of blaming that person, sorry, you were born in the wrong year, no, they don't have to feel inferior, and they can feel empowered. Yes, this is for me, but maybe in 2 years. So that's a totally different perspective and a different way of addressing people when it comes to age.
Yes, and now talking about ability or disability, here are also different problems that we may encounter, and there are, for example, 2 ways that we can say disabled person or person with disability. And in fact, those 2 ways are right to say. There are different variants that are not so good, like differently abled, and different forms that are opposing one group and the other one. So we shouldn't do that. And for example, at Docplanner, in our style guide, we decided to use this version with a disability. So, and that's okay. But there are people who would prefer to use this identity first language. So like disabled, dyslexic, autistic. But as we are talking to the people, we've chosen that other way that doesn't focus on the identity so much. And the same tip that we've given you at the beginning. So it's always about listening, how people want to speak about themselves and how they prefer to speak about themselves, because that's the most important. Yes, and it's similarly with neurodiversity. It's also about how people prefer to be called, so a person with ADHD or ADHD person. But all the ways are, of course, valid. And that's the whole point about neurodiversity. It's about the many varieties in how human brain works. And it's not about illness or health condition that is supposed to be treated, but we are just different. We are different, diverse, not flawed. It's not opposing a person with ADHD with normal person. We don't say normal. We can say neurotypical, but we don't say normal, and we don't oppose norms versus something that is supposed to not be normal. And also about, at this point, plain language serves everyone, not only neurodiverse people. And speaking about plain language, Kalina will tell you more in a moment. Yes, but I will finish with yes. I just wanted to finish. So using short sentences, clear, concise language, and also telling users what will happen next, to not surprise them with some actions. That are the things that will be helpful for everyone. So it doesn't cost us anything to just make be helpful for everyone. Kalina.
Yes, that is certainly true. Just keeping in mind that the way our brains work, our cognition is, of course, limited. We are humans, human beings, people, as we discussed in the flash exercise, and our processing abilities are obviously limited. That's why plain language is a sign of respect towards people we speak to, we design for. And when we talk about cognition, how we process information, it's also worth to mention cognitive biases. And as a person with a background in psychology, I'm going to talk to you about 4 main cognitive biases we as designers, as people who create digital solutions, live with. Everyone lives with those, but today we're going to have a look at how these cognitive biases affect our work as designers who want to design inclusive products. So I'm gonna describe super briefly 4 main cognitive biases in this context. First one being the bandwagon effect, which means that we do something because others do it too. We look at another company that's doing something in one way, and we agree on doing this the same way because this seems like the right thing to do because everyone does it, right? Or maybe within the company, everyone does something in a certain way. So we just follow the crowd. That's the bandwagon effect. Another thing that's pretty close to it is the confirmation bias, meaning that we fixate on data that confirms our beliefs. So we see something, we see, let's say, a piece of evidence, some research, and we interpret this evidence as confirmation. So we tend to interpret things in our favor. Like we have a hypothesis, we have like one way we perceive the world, and each information seems to confirm that. Another thing is like us being reluctant to change, the status quo bias. And this has to do with us limiting the use of resources. Like we as humans, we can say like we are a bit lazy, but it's not out of laziness. It's because we we don't want to spend too many resources. We as humans are limited, so we don't do too many. We are not like too happy to go through too many changes. We like things to stay as they are. We prefer the current state of affairs, and this is the bias we need to be aware of. And last but not least, the curse of knowledge. Super important in the context of plain language. We believe other people work and think like we do. We believe they use the same language. They will understand the same metaphors, the same way we describe things. And this makes it a bit harder for us to empathize, to understand how other people speak, how they perceive the world. Yeah, I think we might want to come back to learning disabilities and difficulties in a bit. We can like come back to this set of questions because this is the last section, so I think this would make more sense if you don't mind. So yeah, we have these four cognitive biases: bandwagon effect, confirmation bias, status quo bias, and curse of knowledge. And now time for another round of very quick exercises. I will use an example, like something you can hear in your team when you're working with people, and I'm going to ask you to guess which bias it is. So let's say we work in a team and you hear from someone, you're discussing a term that you use in the product, and you're saying perhaps, oh, maybe that's not really inclusive. And what you hear as a response is someone saying, oh, we always use this term in the product and no one questioned it. So which bias can it be? What do you think? Any guesses? Status quo. All right. That's it. That's the status quo bias. And as we're a healthcare company, we got some remedies for you. So two possible remedies for the status quo bias could be just asking the hard questions, just for the sake of overcoming this bias. Do question things that tend to be obvious, that meet the status quo, and also use data to prove a point. You can use qualitative data. Let's say you did some user interviews and people were like kind of hesitant towards the term. So you can use this data as evidence that you may need to change something. And quantitative data, like if you see that people, let's say, don't interact with some term as much, you can also say like, hey, this numbers may mean that people are not really happy to use the term. So you can use different sources of data to question this status quo. Again, so let's say we come up with an idea to change something, and then you are met with this. Someone replies, "This is how our competition does it." So which bias may it be? Yeah, thank you, Wojtek, for putting this here. This should be helpful. Yes, bandwagon, and that's it. That's the bandwagon effect. And again, the remedies: do poke holes in the logic. Like even if your competition does something, it doesn't mean that they didn't kind of steal it from someone. Like they may have seen this in their competition, on their competitor's website, in their product, and they may have used the same solution without thinking too much about it. And what also helps a lot with the bandwagon effect, with just accepting other people's ideas, is using a method in meetings that's called 1-2 for all. And let me explain how that works. When you work on collaborative ideation, when you do something known as brainstorming, people tend to accept what the larger group thinks. People tend to agree with the loudest voice, with the majority. But when you use the 1-2 for all method instead, the individual voices are amplified. So it goes like this. First, you ask people to think of solutions solo, individually. Then you ask them to discuss the solutions, to challenge each other in pairs. Then you ask them to do this and pick their favorites in pairs. And then you ask them to work in groups of 4. And then each group of 4 comes up with their own solutions. And this is only at this moment you meet in this large group to discuss everything together. It can be a 1-2 4 method if the group is smaller. The idea is to amplify this individual voice and overcome the bias as well. So I highly recommend that based on my experience and our experiences here in Docplanner. Another one, So you hear something like this. This is how we call it in our team. So it's probably the right word to use, right? Which bias is that? Curse of knowledge? Yes, that's the curse of knowledge. You are so used to certain language that you don't even think that it may be unclear to some people. What helps with the curse of knowledge? My favorite tool, peer review. So when you write something, when you design something, you can ask your colleague to review it, to give you feedback, you can make sure it's clear for them. You can also write in pairs. You can do this bit of pair writing, and also talking to your users, doing usability tests, seeing how they communicate the social media, which language they use, what kind of language they use. This also helps a lot. So again, some pills, some remedies for the curse of knowledge. And the last one, well, you probably guessed already, we have one left. Let's say you run a usability test and you ask the user, oh, what's the sign up button? Hard to locate. So which bias we're talking about here? Yes, that is the confirmation bias indeed. The problem here is that the question is structured in a way that we are kind of looking to confirm something we already assuming. So the button is like it's either like hard or easy to locate. We focus people on ask people to focus on the button itself. They are already thinking about the button, a specific element. What we can do instead is use a research question that's more non-leading. So we can just ask them, oh, how easy was it for you to find what you were looking for? We're asking about the specific goal without saying which element of the page we're looking for. We are thinking about exactly. So there are a lot of ways we can handle it with the way we structure our research methods. Another thing, I think, a more general piece of advice is to diversify your research participant groups. So don't just ask people coming from one room, like don't use this like snowball method of finding participants, meaning that you ask one person and then this person gathers their friends. Like that's not really ideal. It's also a bit biased. Do make sure that you ask people of different age, different gender, different experiences. The more diverse your group is, the less biased your research results should be. So that's it. That's our set of remedies for the biases we all face as designers. There are no designers so great they don't face any biases, which happens to all of us. But if we know the tools to handle those, we're much more equipped and ready for the design journey. And last but not least, just to leave you with some tools using the dedicated work, we prepared an inclusive language toolbox. So some tools to keep at hand. Plain language, obviously, we could talk for another hour about plain language rules. There are some algorithms we tend to use quite often, especially for longer pieces of copy, and this could be Hemingway app, an app that tells us like how gives us the plain language score for our text for what we design. And it's quite effective. I've been using it for years now, and it helps me a lot. But do please keep in mind it's just an algorithm, and it doesn't know the language, the terms our target audience uses. So do use it as a reference, but it doesn't know everything about your audience. Other thing that's often neglected is contrast on websites. So I recommend contrast checkers, and there are different contrast checkers out there. You can have contrast checkers you can use directly in Figma in your design tools. But the one I like most right now is the APCA contrast checker, APCA. I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but it also takes into account the weight of your font. So the one is most accurate. Remember, like even if you write something that's super plain language, beautifully done, crafted, if the contrast is not high enough to read, that won't take you super far. There are a lot of inclusive language guidelines out there, and the ones we can recommend most you can find on the websites of gov.uk, Buffer, 18F. These are the ones we went through and helped us a lot. I see you have some APCA fans in here. Cool. And finally, something that's you may not think about it as a tech tool, NPC communication rule. And we at Docplanner, I think a lot of us did this reading, learn about ambiguous communication goals, and I think a lot of us can agree that this helps us in designing communication, daily communication at work. So this comes from, this is a communication framework, and this is maybe more psychology rooted. Nonviolent communication, yes, obviously. Other good practice is to explain acronyms if you are using them for the first time, which I didn't do, and thank you, Wojtek, for correcting this. Yeah, so, and nonviolent communication is a communication framework. Do Google that, do some reading. Maybe you would like to read a book, listen to a podcast about it, but this also helps you come started communication from a place of mutual respect. So another direction we can point you to after this webinar. And a reading list if you like reading, if you like books. Some books like Brotopia about challenging the male default in the tech world, in the Silicon Valley. Invisible Woman by Caroline Criado-Perez. It's, I would say, a classic about the data bias in a world designed for men. This had a pretty successful Polish release, so I think it's quite popular in Poland. I'm not sure about other countries, but if you haven't read that one yet, I highly recommend it. Yes, absolutely amazing book. I also agree. Another book, Technically Wrong, about the data bias in algorithms, in tech, amazing one also. And Accessibility for Everyone, about accessibility in digital products in general. This one is brief, but fantastic read, and you will get a lot of actionable tips from that one. All right, so that's all we prepared for you when it comes to the slides, but we do hope that's not all. So if you have some other questions, now is the right time. And yeah, I think now it's the space also for Martyna and Wojtek. Would you like to add something? And please share questions on the chat, obviously.
Yes, actually, I would like to add the thing I think we mentioned at the beginning, that we are learning, and also it's not about shaming everyone, because, you know, even while speaking about inclusive language, I've numerously said that something is, for example, simple or basically, and then a couple of slides later we told you that it's not how you're supposed to, you know, speak. So of course, and using acronyms and other different things. And I personally think that it's really, you should try, of course, but if you fail, and surely you will sometimes, then it's not a tragedy, but we should keep trying and listening to other people.
Yes, I would absolutely agree with that. As we said at the beginning, it is a journey. None of us are perfect. It's more of a mindset, the willingness to learn, to listen. So we really hope that you had let's say, a fruitful time, and you listened and learned a lot for your future applications, I could say. Yeah.
Maybe I could, there was a question before that you answered, but kind of I would also like to add something about, like, I think it was Nikki as talking about 34 languages to manage, and understanding how to be inclusive in all of them. So I suppose with this number of languages, you are maybe that localization manager, or there is a person who kind of does that. So this person is first contact for you when you talk about languages and translations. And because it's not only enough to make, I don't know, to document your strategy about kind of inclusion and make all those decisions and then start to implementing them in your base product, but also kind of informing the translators about it. And we do that internally because our colleagues are the translators. So we're in close contact, like Martyna said. But then still, if those people are remote, not part of your group, because they're, I don't know, freelancers or agencies, communicate with them, get to know what they know about that language, and also let them know what are your decisions, because otherwise this will fail in so many places. Yeah.
Yeah, we have this follow-up in here, and maybe I can answer with example from Polish. You do have the word engineers in your environment. People who engineer indeed in English could sound a little uncommon. In Polish, it's a bit different because there are like the word engineer, there's like inżynier or inżynierka. I think if you're talking about computer science engineers, this would also use probably another word. So here's the thing with localization. But with the roles, there are different ways we can handle that. So for instance, if you know the gender of the person you are referring to, you could use different gender forms. So again, like this one thing, there's some things you can do in localization, but there are other things which you can do at the code level. You can create variables, and this could be one way to handle it. And we had this comment about learning disabilities, learning difficulties, so learning challenges. Yeah, so here's the neurodiversity question. I would say, based on my experience, our experience, learning difficulty is more commonly used than other terms. And yeah, I mean, Tanya, if you could elaborate, is it only about the wording you're supposed to use, or is it like more about the question that you would like to clarify? I would say from these two terms, learning difficulty would probably be a more respectful, safer choice.
When
And
we are
yes, the
thinking
comment
about yes, when we are thinking about the social model of disability, so the barriers that the society has that are oh my God, sorry, the barriers that are disabling us, then, for example, a flawed school system can also be this kind of barrier. So it wouldn't be, in my opinion, too bad to call it in terms of disability, but also how people would prefer to call it, and how would you prefer to, for example, talk about your children or about yourself.
Exactly. I think what really helps is to understand like where these names come from. Is it the model that that's based on how the society, the environment could be disabling for someone, or is it a model that says disability is a part of the identity? It is, I would say, more common to use this model that says that it's the environment who is not ideal for someone to express their full potential. And this would be this is the approach we're using at Docplanner most often. But there are like these two main models, and you may stumble upon when you deal with these words. And yeah, with the person, as Wojtek was saying, in English, job names, pretty easy thing. Most of them are not gendered. In Polish, it's a bit different. Also, there's the thing that female gender forms for job names. So for me, it would be like, let's say, a designer. Projektant is the male form, and projektantka would be the Polish female form. And there's also the strong tendency that for female forms to be used more frequently. So if you don't speak Polish, this may be something like a more of an interesting fact for you, that in Polish, especially when it comes to hiring people, job boards, you will see more and more often that female job names are using equally often as the male forms. So we are not, in Polish, that is interesting actually. So we are not going towards forms that are 100% neutral, but there is this increased preference that myself, using the pronouns she, her, using female forms, I would also prefer to use female forms for my job name. As you can see, it is complex in different languages, so working with your localization specialist closely is probably key here. And in case something is unclear, please do ask. We still have a couple of minutes.
I think we can wrap up.
Yes, so if you have any questions, if you keep thinking about this webinar later and you will have like questions popping up, you can find us on LinkedIn. You can find the Docplanner Tech profiles both on LinkedIn and Instagram. So if there's something that will keep you up at night, do message us. We will do our best to answer. As you can see, we're quite passionate about the topic. And yeah, so thank you very much for your attention for this hour and some more minutes we shared. And thank you for your kind words here in the chat. Great to see this. And yeah, I'm really happy you liked it. And thank you for participating and have a great afternoon or the rest of the day, depends on where you're based.